This is Guardian Radio, your station for up-to-the-minute news, intelligent, interactive, and engaging conversation. 96.9 FM. The views and opinions of the hosts and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the position of the management and staff of Guardian Network.
Good morning and welcome to Guardian Radio A.M. Today is Friday. It's Cinco de Mayo Day. Today is Friday. And it's Cinco de Mayo Day. And it's a little after 11 o'clock in the morning. Once again, this is CA Newry and I shall be your host for the day as we talk about disaster preparedness. You know it's soon be hurricane season? I heard that in June 1st, they start preparing. And in order to have that conversation, I have persons from NEMA, the National Emergency Management Agency, and they sent representatives who are a part of an emergency support function unit, right? And I'm just learning that there are 14 individual units, and I have members of that 14 individual units in-house. In fact, I have a unit that is called Unit number 6, which is actually from Social Services, Disaster Management Unit at Social Services. And they correct me right now and write names and everything. And I also have Unit number 14, which is from the Bahamas Humane Society. And all these units work in tandem as we have emergency issues and disasters, right? So let me, without further ado, introduce everybody. We have from Social Services, Miss Michelle Nottage and Miss Andrea Newbold, right? And they work in social services, but they are specifically representing the disaster management unit. And let me formally introduce them as they grab the mic and explain what does that mean. So the listening audience, you have to get closer to the mic so they can hear you actually. You pull that, it's a hard pull. Whoever.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Andrea Newbold, Chief Welfare Officer, Disaster Management Unit, responsible for mass care and shelters, and also representative of NEMA, Emergency Support Function 6, and that's mass care and shelters.
Okay. And with Ms. Newbold is... Are you fixing that mic? With Ms. Newbold is Ms. Michelle Nottage. You work inside the same department?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so let's explain that, right? No, let's start off this way. Earlier in the program, I mentioned that there are 14 units. And I want you to give an overall as to what that means so the listening audience can understand what you mean by units and why does NEMA have units, and then bring in social services and explain your unit specifically as to what does your unit do?
Thank you. Okay, like you said, NEMA, the emergency EFS, the 14 units. The 14 units are all representatives from different departments in government, including the police, Ministry of Health, Social Services, Mr. Grant, those with the Human Society. We have Ministry of Works. We have, I said Ministry of Health. Environmental Health is there also.
And that adds up to 14.
Right, that is less than 14 what I call, but all of them together are the 14. Okay. We work in tandem together in preparation for any disaster that would happen in this country.
Okay. So I know we talked about hurricane, and then I want to talk about disaster, and of course I'm going to get how is the Humane Society involved in this, right? Let's ask this: what is considered a disaster that your particular unit, in the ESF, right, Social Services, is inactive? What is a disaster? Why would you be inactive?
Well, social services, when we talk about disasters, we're not just talking about hurricanes. It could be a fire would affect a great number of people, a community. It could be because of flooding. Sometimes we have heavy rains and some areas do get flooded out. We've been having, because of climate change, we've been having a lot of flooding, and so we could be dealing with tornadoes, because we've been seeing more tornadoes recently, sea surge because of storm. And so when we talk about disaster, I don't want you to just think about it's a hurricane coming, but during this month, May, NEMA and all the ESFs, 14 of us, we actually do preparation before May. It's an ongoing thing, but May is when we come together and we try to get the general public to understand how important preparation is for disasters.
And you mentioned preparation, right? You are employed at social services, so you have a full-time job, and then there's a special unit within your full-time job, right? How do you prepare yourself for an emergency? I'm assuming that is an ongoing preparation thing, is it?
Yeah, it's ongoing. We have training on an ongoing basis. It's interdepartmental as well as other agencies. We get together and have training. Like I said, we have to be training so that we'll be always prepared and ready to act whenever disaster hits.
Okay, and just so the public understand, what type of training, like example, so I can understand what is it that you do?
The training consists of shelter management training, initial damage assessment training. We have psychosocial support training, CPR. It's a whole lot of training to help in case we have a disaster. And the shelter management is normally, we have volunteers who assist social services like the Red Cross and other volunteers who even work in other ministries. But we are trained through NEMA and also with the assistance with USAID. So most of our training comes through NEMA. NEMA organizes our training. And the initial damage assessment is if we have a storm, pray that we don't have any this year and years to come, but we have teams on the ground immediately doing assessment, and that is all coordinated through NEMA.
Okay, so a disaster is basically in mass. Whatever destruction happened, it has to be like 2 or 3, whatever number of houses or people impacted. So when that disaster happened, mass situation, faulty happens, right? You are inactive because they call you up and say, hey, we need a response. You do shelter management. You're a part of a shelter management team. Mm-hmm. What does shelter management means, or what does being a part of this team means?
Well, the shelter management team function is, if there's a disaster, and I'm going to use a hurricane because mostly that's when the shelters are activated, and that is activated through NEMA. NEMA will let us know that, hey, through the Met Office would give NEMA information saying we're going to be impacted by a storm, and they'll tell us exactly what islands are going to be impacted. And so get ready because we have to activate shelters. So we'll know exactly what shelters need to be activated, and then we'll go ahead and we'll do that. But the function, when you talk about a shelter, when we open a shelter, we go in there with the defense force, which is our security. We don't go in without security. We go with the defense force, say security, and then all the shelter managers could be like 4 trained shelter managers to a shelter. And we register persons. So when they come into the shelter, we would register them. We'll find out if they have any, let's say, medical needs. We need to know that. We need to know family units, so we could set them up in the shelter in units, family units, because we try not to mix males and female. We separate. So we have a plan. We have a medical team, a part of the shelter too. So when they come and we register them, get all their information, know who's the family members, know who have on medication, diabetes, hypertension, all of that information is important, and we give them all the shelter rules right there to let them know this is how the shelter functions. The shelter runs, it have a time when we shut down, like 10 a.m. usually, lights out, and everyone to bed, 10 p.m., sorry. So all of that is important because when you come into the shelter, you need to know exactly what's expected of you.
And I like that, right? I like that because I've never been to the shelter because I braved a hurricane home. Mm-hmm. And I want us to, again, rehash the process. I'm going to say me. Mm-hmm. Me and my family, my wife and my children, right? House had issues. And I'm now forced to go to a shelter. I present myself to a shelter, right? In terms of team, who all is at the shelter who I'm presented to?
Okay. The team in the shelter would be the defense force, which will be the security. They would be the persons who will make sure no one bring any contraband or anything in the shelter which is harmful to others. So that's our protection.
Okay, one. I understand that.
And they all the perimeters, they know all the exits, they know everything about the shelter for protection to make sure shelteries and the shelter managers are protected. And after that, first of all, I need to say too, because some people feel like the shelters are stocked with food and water and all of that. We encourage shelteries persons to bring their own supplies. We do have supplies, and if it gets to the point where we might have to have a longer stay like Dorian, mm-hmm. then we reach out to other ESF, which it'll be supplies and relief, if we need food and water to mm-hmm. help with that. But we do encourage the Bahamian population, if you're going to use the shelter, to bring your food, your water, your blanket, a radio. Make sure you bring all your important documents and make sure they seal in a plastic bag, and that's your passport, NIB cards, everything what you want to make sure. Because when you have a storm and everything is chaos, you don't want to lose those important documents. Okay, so you make sure.
Let me interject a minute, Ms. Noble. I think going back to what we said earlier, the most important thing is to realize that your home is your best shelter. Mm-hmm. We wish that you could remain home, but we recognize that in some circumstances, like what you mentioned before, there are going to be situations where you have to approach a shelter.
Yes.
When you do approach the shelter, we expect you to follow the rules, the guidelines that would have been placed on it. Now, you may ask, how do people know what shelters are there? They are a list. We've just completed all our inspections for shelters, so those would be given out through the media, as well as in throughout churches, wherever else, persons would recognize. Well, then, in the event of storm, if you live in this area, you need to be able to go to this church. Most of our shelters are church buildings right now. The ones for hurricanes are church buildings. Right now, we have them all have been inspected, and trust that, like Ms. Newbold said earlier, that we won't have any disaster. But in the event we do, we'll be ready to activate.
Okay. When I'm coming to the shelter, I'm still using me as an example, right? Mm-hmm. I said it's myself, the wife, the child, right? I have a dog. I have a little odd dog, but I have a dog. And this is where I'm going to bring in the Humane Society, right? Mm. I can't leave my dog, right? The shelters have access for my animal. Can I put him inside the cage, and bring him along to the shelters at this present time?
Well, at this present time, I don't think that we don't have pet-friendly shelters. You can then check the Humane Society, and what we would require, because of the volume of animals that we have, we would probably have you come and bring your carrier or your cage with your dog.
Okay, let me understand. Again, I'm preparing for the hurricane. Mm-hmm. I'm more likely going to the shelter, mm-hmm. and I'm saying I need to secure my dog. Yeah. I either have to release him inside the yard and say, go Rover.
Either you release, depending, don't leave your dogs tied, and that's most importantly. But firstly, nowadays, I think we're getting to a point where we now recognizing the fact that animals have to be properly cared for and also identified. And so the Humane Society has started an initiative where we do microchipping. So every single animal at the Humane Society as we speak is microchipped.
Really?
And we offer microchipping on days, I think it's on Tuesdays, you have to make an appointment and bring your dog in to get it microchipped. This microchip of course, will identify your animal in the event of a disaster, and also to reunite you and your pets. The Humane Society function as an ESF 14, being caring for animals. Most of our job is really educating. Trying to educate the public as to management of their animals in their space. You can't leave your dogs outside. You cannot leave your dogs tied outside. If you cannot bring your dog inside the house and you cannot find a boarding space, unfortunately, the Humane Society do not board anymore because of the volume of animals and because of the predicament we've been in since Hurricane Dorian and what have you. We are educating the public is so vast, because we have to make sure people manage the dogs, number one. Also, encourage people to spay and neuter to reduce the population of animals. Because the last thing you would need if there is a huge disaster like Dorian was, and to have the situation of animals and also trying to evacuate people. Because without our affiliates, international affiliates that we met, fortunately, even though Dorian was a terrible thing, but it was also a blessing in disguise, where we were able to meet international partners who assist us. But if that were not the case, and we were thousands of animals would have died, because there was no way we could save everybody. There's no way we could have contained everybody. And so people need to do it every day by thinking before they firstly decide how many animals they're going to have. If you cannot secure it, how many animals you're going to have in your property. If the animals are going to be spayed and neutered. If you're going to be indiscriminately breeding the animals, then you are your own worst enemy in the event of a disaster. And so we go ahead.
Go ahead, Percy Grant. That's Percy Grant from the Bahamas Humane Society.
Yeah.
Dorian opened our eyes.
Yes.
That was the major disaster that caused everyone to say, we need to be organized and be prepared.
Yes.
Abaco was flooded. I saw pictures of dogs being distressed.
Yeah.
How did the Humane Society even combat that? Dealt with it?
I know.
What happened?
Again, being animals, and because of we also the last ESF function 14, as you see here, and I'm sure around the world. So there's a huge amount of affiliates that are really just animals. They all they think is animals. So the minute Dorian hit, we had everybody coming in here from different worldwide organizations coming to assist, because they knew that this small island would have had problems with animals, and so we had to use them to get animals from Abaco to Nassau. We had to then empty our shelter to get animals, to get space for.
When you say empty,
we had to empty. We had to reach out to American shelters, reach out to our international shelters, international organizations who assisted us in airlifting our dogs out. And we were able to airlift hundreds and hundreds of dogs to the United States to get relief in our shelter to accommodate dogs from Abaco. And since then, for some strange reason, people have been giving up dogs for various reasons. I think Dorian, the pandemic came, COVID, and people became stressed. I think people just, they don't want the dog no more. They just started to falter. And so we, being the Humane Society, we suffered a lot and is still suffering because people are just dumping. So we now have to educate people that, look, you just can't do that. So we reach out to our local organizations here who donate food and assist us, and local residents who give us money, and we then provide food for dogs in their space.
And similar to what I asked Miss Nordage and Miss Newbold, on what to bring, how to prepare. And I know the Humane Society don't do boarding of animals anymore.
No.
But now in this emergency
case, we would accommodate animals in their own cage, in their own carriers.
So come with your cage.
They come with your cage.
Do I need to bring food?
You need to bring food. We would encourage you to bring food. Because, I mean, even though we have food, we need extra, we always need extra food. So we encourage you to bring your own food. You encourage you to also make sure the animals is on medications, that you bring the meds. You encourage that. Because, you know, there are lots, like people, there are lots of animals that are on heartworm. Some animals have seizures. They have to also take ace-promazines. They have to go on medication that would keep them calm during a storm. There are lots of the same issues that humans have. Animals have that same issue. So particularly in a shelter, we have. So you're looking at a multi shelter residents of who's sick, who isn't sick.
Let me ask you
Yes,
this.
sir.
In the future,
Yes.
does the Humane Society plan to build a hurricane shelter for animals?
Yes.
Like you say, yes, just like that.
Yes, because it's a dream of mine. It's always been a dream of mine. We need to have. We've been given property from the government, and in the near future, we're hoping to build a huge area. We've got 15 acres, so we will have a animal unit, an animal dome, hurricane dome for animals. We will have that, along with other hospital facility for animals, boarding, all those stuff will be done.
Okay, but let's go back to social services and the disaster management unit, right? In the Bahamas, we have an issue with mental health
Yes.
Bahamians, right? Who I always wonder what happens to them during a hurricane, a disaster, an emergency. And again, using myself as an example, say I need to go to a hurricane shelter. Will the shelter have these special needs type of Bahamians living with me? I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I just want to know what to prepare myself going to a shelter and having persons who live under the bridge with their own issues and stresses. What happens?
We have a special needs shelter. It's Epworth Hall on Shirley Street. And also we have the Salvation Army on Mackey Street. And persons who live, and we have some homeless people in the Bahamas. And those persons, they are usually utilize Epworth Hall or Salvation Army because it's close to the Porter-Ski Dock. And in fact, that shelter in particular, I think, is one of the more utilized shelters when we have a storm. Those two shelters, Epworth Hall, Shirley Street, Special Needs Shelter, and Salvation Army on Market Street. And because of the population out on the dock and who are already living homeless, so they utilize those shelters.
And back to the question on the team who's at the shelters, right? And you mentioned shelter managers, you mentioned the Defense Force officers, right? What about medical personnel? Are they a part of your team? And what about Bahamians with disabilities, right? Who have issues, mobile issues, no? And I want to know, when you go to the shelter, what happens for them people?
Yeah. The special needs shelter is disability friendly, so we encourage persons if they are physically in wheelchairs, especially, or any, because when we talk about special needs, it'd be visual impaired, physically impaired. A lot of us, we think we're not visually, we don't have a disability. We wearing glasses. I take my glasses off. I have to look close to read. Thing. So we try to say we not have a disability, but we do, right? But that's the shelter. What we encourage persons to go, because we have the medical team is set up in that shelter. We have trained social workers who also deal with, we can do counseling for any persons with mental issues. And of course, in a shelter, and this is why I like the system with the ESFs, in a shelter, if we have any issues, medical issues we cannot handle, we refer to that ESF, which will be Ministry of Health and Wellness, and they would cover the medical and the mental issue part of it. And of course, in the height of a storm, if things happen, we'll have to wait for all clear for us to move sometime to deal with with certain issues, but we do have those ESF support that we can call on to assist us. And so with the mental health part and the disability part, and I must say we have a team, the team when we do inspections, we have a team that deal with the Disability Commission. We have inspectors who look at the shelters and see if they're disability friendly. And the other shelter would we have in Bahamas would be found to be disability friendly is Holy Cross Anglican Church in Highbury Park.
Okay. And I know.
I think before we go further to that too, is that, Disability Commission and the Disability Affairs units, they have been asking persons with disabilities to register so that they will know exactly. And one of their questions is if in the event you need to evacuate as a result of any disaster. So they would once you would have registered with this council, they would know exactly who is where. Which disabled person is where and whether they would need any type of assistance. And they too would lend their assistance in getting that person to shelter or getting that person to assistance.
And we're talking about with person from representative from NEMA who are part of the ESF, which is the Emergency Support Function Unit, right? And different areas. There's 14 different units who all partner to respond to emergencies. But going back to the word emergencies, NEMA, National Emergency Management Agency, right? Hurricane is not the only emergency. Just the other day off Carmichael Bellot Road, there about Hamster Road, there was a mass fire. All kind of clapboard houses was destroyed. Those people had an emergency. They had no place to go. And I see so far you mentioned churches, right? That you go to churches and school as a shelter. Churches and school open. They can't be going inside interrupting the people them churches. What happens during regular time, not hurricane time now, when these places are closed down. Regular time and there's an emergency, like a fire, mass fire. It's like several homes gone. These people need a shelter now. Where do you put them?
Well, once the department becomes involved, a place of safety is identified for these persons. We have emergency shelters now that are being operated for persons who are homeless or do not have anywhere to stay down on their leg for some reason. In the event of a disaster like what would have happened with that fire, a place of safety was identified for these persons, and they were all invited to come in regardless of the situation. Once they would have presented to us with the letter that said, yes, they were a part of that fire, because, once you have a fire, you need to go to fire branch, and they would provide a letter stating, well, Mary Jane was a part of this fire, and a place of safety was identified for them, and they would have come into, we would have activated the shelter from this end, from social services end, and they were allowed to remain, those who presented themselves. Now remember, we cannot force anyone to come into shelter, and so we provide the space. In some cases, persons do not come, and we cannot force you to.
Okay, I have two questions I wanted to ask. Well, let me ask this one first. What is this community support unit?
Community Support Services Unit is a part of the Department of Social Services that deals with all our assistance, especially food, clothing, shelter, appliances, utilities.
Okay, and then the other question I thought about, right, because I'm thinking, how does the Humane Society come in the whole 14 emergency support function, the ESF, right? When you all meet, right? I mean, like regularly, the plan, strategies, and the way forward. Like, when you all meet?
We meet on a regular basis with NEMA once a month, beginning February it is. But we also, like I said, we take part in training. It's an open communication where between all the ESFs, because they would have been working together for quite a while. We support each other because some persons may have an exhibition, or one unit may be having a training, so we all support each other, so we cross-train. But on a regular basis, we do.
So what is go ahead.
In fact, we just had a training
Tuesday,
Wednesday, and Thursday is Restore Island Keys exercise, and with Family Island administrators and also Family Island counselors. were at that training along with all of the ESFs. And that is like an exercise, like a real storm is a simulation. And we'll be in a real hurricane situation. And so that helps us to hone our skills to make sure we give the NEMA, we call the NEOC, their emergency support center, the information and precise information to be fed back to the Prime Minister so they could know exactly what's happening with the storm. Mm-hmm. So that training is a very important training to have everybody know exactly what to do and to the simulation in case we have a storm. And it's a very good training. So all the family islands involved persons were on even via virtual so they could understand how important this training is.
I'm very impressed that you include the family island administrators and I assume the family island teams, right? Mm-hmm. And that the training is ongoing and then specialized, and then you do the cross training, right? But what about community leaders, right? I live in Foxhill. I in charge of a little small community, right? Where I communicate and WhatsApp everybody, say, "Baby, we doing this. Look out for this dog. You know, there's a strange black car in the neighborhood, right? How is there a mechanism for the ESFs, right? Mm-hmm. Can give the community training? Say, well, your job is to know. Is even if there's training to say disseminate information, say, well, can you forward this in your WhatsApp groups to make sure everybody is involved, especially with the dogs too?
We do that.
You know, you do that, so they exist.
That exists.
Okay.
Yes.
And how is that information disseminated, or who's responsible for that inside the ESF to say, well,
it depends on,
we blasting the information?
I guess it depends on what department is doing it. The social services, of course, will have their own, and we, the Humane Society, will have our own. We use a lot of social media and Twitter. We do is all avenues to try to get the word out, and also to educate. Again, getting back to population of animals and trying to encourage people to spay and neuter. We're hoping to have next year. We got permission to have Operation Potcake again, and I know if you're all familiar with that, where we are going to be inviting in intern veterinarians from all around the globe to come in here, right? And they're going to we'll be doing that again.
So spay and neutering thing.
Spaying and neutering. We got to be.
It'll be free. I need to bring the dog. Tell me that when that happens, so I can bring my dogs.
It will be quite, it will be all over the place, all over the news. I'm sure you would hear about it. But it's important because, again, we're trying to get to a point here in the island. If there is this extreme disaster, it will minimize anything horrible happening as far as the loss of life of animals and also people, because people are going to freak if they know their dogs. They got their dogs, and they have to leave their dogs.
Yes.
So people are going to freak. You talk about mental illness. That is we see it every day. And I'm particularly sure, particularly after the pandemic, and not just it ain't after, because we're still going through that right now, with COVID still on. But people, we have discovered that there's a lot of mental issues. Animals who follow some homeless person, and sometimes he got 10 and 20 dogs following him, and they are loyal, and they all look good. You don't ever see them. All like scrawny. Notice that. You don't ever see scrawny dogs going behind a homeless person. That's just very interesting, because they may have a mental issue, but they know that animal have to be fed, and so whenever they scrunch up for them, they will also make sure that animal is fed.
Good. We're going to take our first break right now, right? Then when we come back, I want us to talk more about shelter life and the shelter managers in terms of their training on how they operate the shelters, right? I want to talk more about that. Even at the Human Society and how the shelter manager of the Human Society operates on a daily basis. This is CA Newry, Radio A.M. We're talking with members of NEMA, a part of that team, NEMA, National Emergency Managers Agency. These persons enacted a part of the ESF, which is the Emergency Support Function Unit, where their specialty areas manage various segments on case of emergency. But I have speaking with me today, I have Percy Grant from Bahamas Humane Society. Of course, I have Michelle Nottage, and I have Andrea Newbold from Social Services Department, Social Services and Disaster Management Unit. And we shall be right back.
Get ready to celebrate our 50th independence with a golden jubilee. The Road to 50 presents the inaugural Jubilee Day. It's a day to celebrate the Bahamas and the Bahamian people in grand style. We're jump-starting the Independence Party on Friday, May 5th at the Southern Recreation Grounds. Come and explore the cultural village from 4 to 9 p.m. and take your seats by 6:30 to witness a fantastic cultural show. It's all about the black, gold, and aquamarine. Wear your colors to show your pride. Schools all across the Bahamas will be taking part. This day is made to celebrate you. It's Jubilee Day, Friday, May 5th. For more information, visit celebratebahamas.com or go on social media and type in Celebrate Bahamas.
To be a Bahamian, proud to be a Bahamian, proud to be a Bahamian, yes, God gave this land to me.
Love the show? Want to give your support? Become a sponsor today. Call 302-2300 for our rates and packages. That's 302-2300. Become a sponsor on Guardian Radio 96.9 FM. Fresh news, smart talk, all day.
The 6th edition of the Bahamas Games are on the way. July 7th through the 15th. Get ready for inter-island sporting competition in the spirit of unity and camaraderie. Which island is gonna win? It's the Bahamas Games. Our nation, our talent, our games. And look out for the B Games crew coming to your island soon. For more information, call 809-242 or visit thebahamasgames.org.
This is Guardian Radio 96.9 FM. Fresh news, smart talk, all day.
And welcome back to Guardian Radio A.M. with CA Newry, and we're talking about disaster preparedness. Before the break, I was going to ask about the shelter managers, right? And then I thought, wait, any kind of preparation happening, any kind of seminars and training where I, as a regular Blow Bahamian, can go and learn about disaster management, learn about hurricane preparedness, disaster preparedness, and they say, yeah. So I say, okay, let me ask for that first. So what's happening? What's happening on the agenda?
Okay, May is Disaster Preparedness Month.
Yes.
We started in church on Sunday past at the St. Agnes Church, where we worship together. And then the entire month, we will be having talk shows such as this one, where we will come and bring information to the general public about disaster preparedness, being prepared and being ready in the event. Just to give the Ministry of Health a free commercial, next week, Thursday, they are going to have a health and wellness expo, I think it's called, at the Ministry of Health on Meeting Street, where all of the ESF's 14 units, I think, have been invited
yes.
to set up booths and provide information for persons. Further to that, at the end of the month on the 27th, NEMA has a exhibition also, and that one will be held on Arawak Key. And we all have been invited to have booths there, so the general public are all invited to attend. I'm certain you'll hear more about it in the media, but next week, Thursday, Ministry of Health parking lot, the 27th. Yeah, as Ms. Noble is reminding me, come. You may be fortunate. We have free giveaways. We have pamphlets. So there'll be no excuse to say you're not prepared when you leave that exhibition.
So let me go back to shelter managers, right? Dorian, I always use now, at least it's officially, Dorian's now the benchmark because how tragic it was, how horrific it was, how taxing it was on the resources that we have in the Bahamas and the resources we had in the shelters, especially how long-term it was, right? It was more than a week. Right, weeks, right, months, right,
And we continue,
And still,
and it still continues. There are some people who are still in shelters and getting aid, misplaced. That's what you call it, misplaced. My concern or my question now is in terms of shelter managers and how they work. They can't be living in the shelters all the time, right? So how does the shelter management happen with a shelter manager? who manages the place.
You mean as far as working hours?
Yeah, working hours.
Well, it's working
yeah.
hours as a 24-hour shift.
It's 24 hours.
24-hour
it's
shift.
24
So we
hours.
have
And
someone
that's-
that would work from about 8 until 4 until midnight until 8. And that continues. So there's always someone there as a shelter manager.
Okay, and that's for both the Humane Society and
that's the same thing. We have staff who also come down and they stay.
stay at the Humane Society for
Stay
the whole
at the
hurricane.
Humane Society, you know, and I guess it depends on their surrounding, their personal space, whether they feel it may be compromised. And the Humane Society is a real dome and in structure, and so a lot of the staff members stay there. You know, we
They find it safer. Let me go there
find
to
it
work
safer.
one
Yeah,
time.
they bring all like their sleeping gear and all that, and we just fill the place up with food for humans, as well as animals. And so we do our best to accommodate and make sure that all the animals are safe. And and that's again another task when people come in, making sure that we put different, because there's many different breeds. There's some breeds that have the propensity of being a bit don't get along with another dog. And I'm sure, I don't know, shelter might be the same as people. So we have to make sure that we have them separated properly as well. And the reason too why we need staff and managers, everybody managing on staff, is to make sure that there's no disasters, there's no fights, there's no, and because it's the same as
Yes.
Same
Yes,
thing.
security.
the same
yeah.
thing.
That is why we have
so we have
security.
to, and so we do all of that.
And who's in charge of NEMA now? And how? And the reason why I asked that, right? Because I should know, and I feel ashamed I asked the question, but I need to know who's in charge of NEMA, who coordinates, the chairman of who coordinates all the meetings, right? And because I know you all have a ministry. We have a ministry now. Once upon a time it was just NEMA, but now we have a ministry of disaster preparedness or disaster whatever it is. I no longer know who's in charge.
Who's in charge, yeah.
Right? So who's in charge? Or how is the in charge business go? Everyone going quiet on that one.
Disaster preparedness authority, and we have the minister, Miles LaRoda.
Right.
We have Alex Storr, who is the chairman, and then that's DRA. And then you have NEMA, who would be, sometimes we call him Captain Russell,
Captain.
Director Russell,
Yeah,
Stephen Russell.
yes.
He is in charge in NEMA.
And the PS
And
is
also
Carl
our
Smith.
PS is
Carl
Carl Smith.
Okay, no Carl Smith
Yeah.
too. Good guy. And I know NEMA has autonomy. They run independently. They're on Gladstone Road, right? And and perhaps I can bring in someone to explain how the ministry acts with NEMA, like when the emergency happens and NEMA enacts itself, right? I would like to know how that happens and how the ministry does it, because I don't understand. Because
I'm
it's
not
all
certain
new.
either.
It's all new, but I understand NEMA. I understand NEMA, right? Back on the questions regarding shelters and managers, right? You have support teams who is there at the shelter with you, right? You mentioned the Defense Force.
Yes.
Right. You mentioned Ministry of Health officials who were there for counseling. You mentioned the shelter managers, right?
Yes.
They're there. Anyone else in that mix at a particular shelter?
That is basically
The team right there.
the team right there, and the team with the social workers who are trained shelter managers. We all social workers are also trained at counseling. We are trained to identify people in distress, and we have we use we train to do counseling. Persons might be a female who might feel uncomfortable in the shelter, and she may have other issues before she came in the shelter. So we have persons in the shelter manager who would be looking out.
Crisis managers.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, like what's going
Crisis
on. We'll see
intervention.
crisis intervention, see if this person something's going on with them. So we pick them. We'll talk, pull them aside, talk to them, find out exactly what's going on. Because some people are not going to come to the shelter manager and say, I'm having this issue. So we are vigilant and watching and seeing what's going on, especially with children, because we make sure children are safe, the elderly is safe, persons with disability, we want to make sure everyone is safe. And so we pay attention to that, and we provide those assistance, because we are trained to do counseling and other areas. We have clinical social workers we deal with mental health care, and we have the general social workers who we deal with just with everything. Okay.
And Mr. Grant, going to you, and I'm still impressed that the government has included the Humane Society in this initiative as part of the 14 emergency support function unit, right? Do you need local partners to make sure our animals are safe?
Well, we have liaison. We try to have a liaison officer in every island to make sure that we know what's happening with the animals. Like example, Nemo, we had to go down in planes and take food for animals by the pallet in various islands that was affected, and we make sure that we try to work with the other island administrators to try and encourage the farm animals that the people to know exactly what they have. Try to get some tagging situation going on. I know dogs now and cats are now being microchipped. I'm sure cattle will probably have some tags, spray them, do whatever, air clips or whatever, so that they would know exactly what they have. But it's mostly the management is overseeing and educating people to manage whatever they have in stock.
I never even thought about farm animals, and I appreciate
and
you
also
bringing that
to
up.
encourage farmers never to leave animals corralled during a storm. They have to leave them free. They cannot be in any
My sheep and my goat?
Yeah, they got to be free. They have to be free in a
And
disaster.
your chickens too.
You got to lose the chickens?
You got to lose everything. Everything got to be
Let 'em
free
drown.
because you can't leave them because they would then stampede and they would die. They would you will have another kind of disaster. So you can imagine then after Hurricane Dorian, there was a lot of issues with trying to bury. We had international people coming here showing how to bury animals properly, because that's another process as well. So you don't need that. And in some cases, if it's a horrible situation like Dorian, where the burial of humans came into question. So it's a very serious thing. And the reason why we need to educate the public about management of animals in their space is important, and not letting animals breed indiscriminately. Encourage people to spay and neuter their animals. That's important, because if you don't spay your dogs, and you can imagine a dog goes into heat every 6 months. A cat goes into heat every 3 months sometimes, because we call them polyestrous, because they could have 2 sets of kittens in a year, so which is very serious. So we encourage people to spay and neuter, to understand and remember that you can imagine 10 kittens or 10 dogs having 10 animals, and they're breedable. They can breed in 6 months. You know how serious that is. So the multiplication, and those people who are mathematicians could understand how the population can grow and how important it is that we Bahamians get into the thing where we spay and we neuter our animals.
So, from what I'm understanding, and the music is start playing now, education is key.
Education.
And a part of your program, besides being prepared, disaster preparedness, is making sure everyone inside the Bahamas is educated on how to protect themselves during the disaster, and being informed of the various services and what can happen. Good. This has been Guardian Radio A.M. with CA Newry. I had some great people on today. I had Percy Grant, I had Andrea Newbold, and I had Michelle Nottage. Right? Yeah, missed the name just now. Michelle Nottage. Here, just explain to me how their department works during the emergencies. And I thank you very much for your dedication and helping us inside the Bahamas.
Thank you.
Guardian Radio A.M. with CA Newry. Have a beautiful and blessed day. And happy Cinco de Mayo. And let's drink.
Jubilee Day.
It's Jubilee Day. Thank you very much. It's Jubilee Day.